Hey guys, welcome back to my show. In this episode, I have an amazing guest with me today. Some of you may know her from her show TED Talks Daily, and some of you may know her from her latest book called Flawless, which is about the beauty industry in Korea. Our guest today is Elise. Hi Elise, how are you today?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
Thank you so much. So please introduce yourself and maybe talk about, your show and your book.
Sure, I'm a longtime journalist and host. I spent most of my adult career at NPR, National Public Radio, where I appeared on shows like All Things Considered and Morning Edition. And in 2015, I opened NPR's first ever bureau in Seoul, South Korea, where I was responsible for covering South Korea, North Korea, and Japan. And that's everything across those three nations. So politics, business, culture. And I had a fantastic time. And when I came back, one thing that I really had unfinished business, or one area of unfinished business, what was what was going on with the women there. South Korea has very specific and rigid demands about presentation and how people look. And I found a culture that was very sort of focused on appearances. And so I wanted to dive into that, the effects of that, how it plays into ongoing gender disparities and even gender battles going on, not just in South Korea, but the world.
Absolutely. I think the book really grows into it like Flawless. I think it just shows like the different aspect. Like, you see beauty on television and beauty, like always talk about like you need to wear makeup, you need to go to Sephora, buy some products and things. But I think your book really shows like the negative impacts as well, which I think is really important.
Thank you. Thank you for reading it. And yes, I didn't even mention in the intro, it's called Flawless, Lessons in Looks and Culture from the K-Beauty Capital. It's a book out from Dutton, which is a division of Penguin Random House. And you can get it in any format, in hardcover, in paperback, in audio, or an ebook, anywhere you get books. And so for listeners who are interested in how technology is really changing what we expect of our bodies and what we do to our bodies, how like more and more AI generated filters have an effect on how we think about ourselves and the way that we look. South Korea was kind of a canary in the coal mine. It was a futuristic look at things that are happening now in the United States and all over the developed world. So if you're interested in those topics, I totally recommend getting a copy.
Yes, everyone listening to this episode, I'll be linking Elise's website in the show notes. It has all the information, her books, her career, everything on there. So feel free to check that out. It also has a contact information. So if you are interested in talking to her more about, beauty or just anything in general, yeah, you can check that out. So Elise, I have a question for you. So we are in the 21st century where like we have Sephora, we have Instagram, we have Twitter, we have all these big things that kind of play into the role of young minds. We have 10-year-olds going to Sephora and buying stuff, like Drunk Elephant and products like that.
For sure.
So in a world where beauty standards and perceptions are affecting like lots of people, how do you hope your book Flawless is able to help reduce that impact?
I think that one thing that I didn't question growing up was this notion that my exterior appearance was myself, that how I looked was who I was. And one thing that I had to do the work of in my early adulthood and continue to have to do work on is remembering that I matter and that my worthiness and my value as a human being has nothing to do with, or very, very little to do with, what my hair looks like and whether my skin is smooth and whether my body fits whatever skinniness standard reigns today. And so one thing that I write about, or one thing that is a compelling reason for why I wrote a book and why I continue to talk about these topics of beauty culture, is to just remind people and to have a wider conversation and discourse among all of us that we are in kind of a collective matrix, a collective hallucination that wrongly conflates appearance with worthiness. And to remember that our individual worthiness and our appearance are two separate things and they do not need to be linked. It's very hard to be grounded and remember that, especially when we are in an increasingly visual culture and when we are in a media system, a social media reality, and in a highly sort of commercial, consumerist, and capitalistic world that's constantly trying to sell us on things. to remember that our worthiness like comes from something that is completely not superficial and not on the surface, right? And so part of beginning that journey for all of us individually, and then hopefully a critical mass of us are all doing more about it and speaking out more about it, starts with just recognizing that in the first place, to tease apart these issues, to question why things are the way they are, like why we are constantly being sold on things to fix problems, whether it's wrinkles, whether it's freckles, whether it's something about our bodies that isn't right. And so just even having the recognition that the beauty industry has always preyed on the notion that there's something worth fixing, that there is a problem with you somehow, and that you can buy a product or procedure to fix it, is a really important understanding and realization to have in the first place. Because what we all need to work on is the notion that we're enough to begin with.
I mean, I completely agree with you. You said like pretty much the essence of it, right? Like we have like, even the advertisements we have for beauty products, they immediately show like a constant, like the moment you put the application on your skin becomes more fairer or more glowy. And then we have like young people in their teens, or even like as young as like 10 or 5 years old, looking at them, asking their parents or their families to buy them these products, which may or may not even be good for their skin. And so just from the get-go, or just from the time they're like little, they're already under the perception that they need to be a certain way, they need to look like Miss India, or they need to look like Miss America, or whatever. And I think it's just important to know, right, that you are good the way you are, you're made a certain way. And sure, like you could cut your hair, have like those tiny procedures done, but at the end of the day, you're really essentially you losing yourself, right? You're not staying in that mold or staying in that place you used to be. And when you look in the mirror, it's like, who am I looking at?
Exactly. And I think it's really useful to remember, I consider myself a body liberation journalist. And what I mean by that is so much of what we do with our outer appearance and our bodies is really about consent. So I trace in South Korea in the book times of government control, like under martial law in Korea, under a dictatorial leader, Park Chung-hee. Men were not allowed to cut their hair. Women had to wear skirts that were a certain length. Men were not allowed to cut their hair in Chosun, Korea, so during a dynasty. But then they were forced to cut their hair certain lengths under dictatorial Korea, under Park Chung-hee. And then now we think that we are making choices with our bodies, whether our hair is long, our hair is short, our fashion choices, our skincare choices, our plastic surgery choices. But how much of that is a choice, and how much of it is presented to us as what we should do under capitalism, under consumerism, in order to quote unquote better ourselves, because we are going to be judged over our looks. And so Flawless isn't really what it seems. It is a book that is ostensibly about the rise of Korean beauty products and procedures, but really, in my opinion, it's a book about consent, and whether we are really consenting, or as consenting as we think about what we do with our bodies. Because so much of the work that happens on our bodies these days isn't just putting something onto the surface of the skin, but actually changing the skin and the tissue and the muscle and the bone, because there are more and more fillers and lasers and procedures that actually modify our bodies and our forms and the forms that they came in to begin with. And so all of that is really worth thinking about. It's not too distant from the other conversations that we have about bodily consent and liberation, whether it's against sexual assault, whether it's about reproductive rights. We should also, on that spectrum, include what we are expected to do with our bodies under consumerism.
I think like you definitely did touch a great point here again, because like with beauty, right, it's honestly very subjective, right? For someone, beauty might just be like getting rid of the freckles, or for someone else it might just be having glowy skin and having like skin that glows in the sun and that kind of thing. But just knowing that like if someone says, I'm going to cut a hair certain way, like how you just mentioned, you want it to be really your choice, not, you might be saying that, yes, I want to cut my hair, but in the back of your head, are you thinking that because your colleagues or your friends are telling you to, or is it because you truly want to cut your hair?
Or is
Kind
it
of
out of
like,
fear? Is it because you might be judged poorly if you don't, right? Or
exactly,
you do?
yeah.
So I think a society that really polices our appearance, which is what I found in South Korea, what I find in certain subcultures in the United States, means that if you were going to be policed, if you know you will be judged harshly if you don't look the right part, then it's completely logical to change your appearance in order to look the part. But then it raises the question of choice, whether it really is a choice or whether we're living in a system or a structure in which there's really isn't that much choice at all. There might be
Absolutely.
choice on the margins. You might like get to choose the different shades of eyeshadow or shades of lip tint. But the fact that you have to wear makeup at all is part of a larger regime of thinking.
Absolutely. I think like now, before it kind of used to be like makeup is kind of just a way to amplify your look for like work or for just like looking better on camera and things. But now it's just become this daily thing where people are just wearing it because they are just expected to wear it, or they're afraid of what would happen if they do not wear it. Because I know sometimes we have baggy eyes and it's normal, right? You wake up with baggy eyes. That's a normal thing. You don't wake up looking like the Queen of England. You wake up looking like yourself, which is totally normal. You have curly hair when you wake up because you're in bed for a long time, and it's totally normal. But now we just have this expectation, like as you've been saying, the expectation to be this certain person that other people want you to be, and be losing ourselves in the sense that we forget that we are only human. We have our own choices, we have our own dreams and realities that we want to fulfill, which we are not able to because of like the constant nagging of other people, both indirectly and directly.
I wholeheartedly concur.
So, what are some common misconceptions you've heard about, like, beauty standards and just perceptions in general?
Misconceptions, gosh. I mean, the most common one is that there is a set way to look. In South Korea, I found a really narrow set of standards. And even in hiring, the employment ministry, the tweet has now been taken down, but once tweeted that in order to get a job or get ready for job interviews, you should have a certain cup size bra, right? Like that you should have a certain feminine look, that you should probably have your hair kept. And so standards at all, or the notion that you're supposed to look any certain way, is a misconception. It's a note. These are fed by us, and I think that they're worth challenging, though it's nearly impossible to challenge. One thing that I really got at in my research is the notion that, and this is a misconception, that it's narcissistic or it's vain to change your appearance. When in fact, I always say, like, don't hate the player, hate the game. When you're in a system where your looks matter so much, then of course it's logical to change your appearance. That's not really for you. It's really for everybody else. It's for fear of being judged. It's in order to get a job. It's in order to be successful on the dating markets. And it's in order to earn social capital, social and political capital. And so I have really let go of my judginess that I went to Korea with about people who got a lot of work done or had to pay to get work done. I want us to be in a society in which you don't have to do any of that stuff at all. You can opt out without any consequences. But so long as we are in a society where there are consequences if you don't play your part, then it makes complete logical sense to me that people have to make some choices that they might not otherwise make, or they might modify their bodies. The biggest sort of misconceptions about our thoughts about beauty, of course, are that beauty equals morality, that to look good equals being good, that having good appearances and meeting whatever conventional standard of beauty of the day is means that you live the good life. I think that's an incredibly marginalizing and stressful misconception because it increases the pressure on everybody who doesn't quote unquote look good or fit the conventional norms. It marginalizes those who will never fit those norms. And it increases our judginess, right? And our judgment of one another, because then you're assuming that just because you're fat or your teeth aren't straight or whatever it is, that somehow you're not as good of a person or you don't live as good of a life. And so the conflation between beauty and morality is one huge misconception that needs to be broken down. It's also very stressful for anybody who is doing the work to keep up with whatever the norms are or can actually somehow fit in those norms, because you're assuming that your worth is all coming from doing the work of keeping up. And so that's a treadmill that you can't get off of. That's a race that you'll never win. And those are all things that I think need to be broken down.
Absolutely. I think just like the main thing, like I feel like a lot of this you're talking about, right? It's mainly stemming from fear and rejection, right? We are afraid of like what people think of us and like what would happen if we do not follow procedures, right? And I think once we have that eliminated, once we have that out of the way, we can finally follow our dreams. There's also like this common thing that people always are telling us, either directly, indirectly, both ways, where they like be the prettiest girl in the room, right? You might have heard of this. And I think, before I used to be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, I guess that means internally and externally both, right? But now when you think about it as like a teenager, like as a 16-year-old, it's like, do I want to be the prettiest girl in the room? Because that's like a lot of people in the room, you're competing with a lot. And why do you want it to be a competition, right? If you are happy in your own skin, you're happy with the way you are, then that's perfect. You're pretty in your own way, right? And if you think about it, right, beauty, as I said earlier, beauty, being called pretty, being quote unquote ugly, if you will, that's all subjective. Something that I might find pretty might be ugly to someone else, or something someone else finds ugly might be pretty to me. And so by saying pretty girl in the room, you're setting like this high expectation bar, which really no one can really set or do, because we do not know the true definition or the true idea behind what beauty quote unquote is.
Yep, I agree. And I also think that the more you strive toward whatever media or beauty industry definitions of perfection are, the more lifeless we get, the less human that we get. You look at AI's versions, these AI programs that are out there today, like Midjourney. If you Google or if you search in them for like ideal American man or ideal American woman, these figures are cyborgian. They are quote unquote flawless. They're also lifeless. They are about as predictable as a music box figurine. And so you have to remember that the pursuit of any sort of external perfection comes at the expense of connection with ourselves and connection with our truest humanity, which values diversity and difference.
For sure. I think with AI just complicates things. I think they already exist in problems that kind of just, you have new problems now. It's no longer like, about other people. It's also involving AI now, because we have Instagram filters, we have that website you talked about, and there are many more. Not just that, there's ones where you can have AI talk in a certain way. We have so much going on. I think yes, AI can do things for the better. It's positive in the sense that it helps take away time that you might spend doing research for certain, or not research, never use AI for research, actually, excuse me for that, never use AI for research. But what I mean is coding or something you kind of would spend a lot of time on, just use that. It's good for those purposes. But I think when it comes to ideal XYZ, it's really demeaning to both the culture and the person, because it's just flawless, right? And no one is flawless, and if they are, it is a possibility, right? But I personally think that AI does kind of play a huge role in criticism and facing self-hatred towards yourselves.
Yeah.
So my last and final question for you is more advice. What advice do you have for young people or just youth in general?
Yeah, well, just as we teach youth in general about sexism and racism and xenophobia, we should also make sure that younger generations to know about pretty privilege and fat phobia and their potential for harm, right? Because the more narrow our standards become, the wider the pool for ugly becomes. And while it might be individually beneficial to try and fit into those standards, I see a lot of girls, going to Sephora, a lot of Sephora tweens with 10-step skincare routines. And I can see how it's individually beneficial, or it can calm anxieties for, the one person or the one girl who's taking part. It's collectively harmful because you're putting a lot of this work or the product buying or the procedure fulfilling out of the reach of everyone. And the way we need to think about it is that every body is worthy and every body deserves dignity and to feel safe and to be loved.
Thank you so much. I think that piece was the perfect way to end the episode. Thank you so much for being here, Elise.
Thank you, Annika. I appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for listening. I'll be putting up Elise's website in the show notes. Be sure to check out her book Flawless and her other works. Thank you so much everyone for listening, and I'll see you all next week.